Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Sophia. So glad to be here with you. If you are new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe. Click the button below so you stay updated to new videos. Today I want to speak about a question that I get asked very often, which is the differences of people learning Portuguese when they come from Romance languages backgrounds. So in my previous video, I spoke about what it's like for a lot of my students who are English native speakers. People ask me, is it easier if I already know Spanish, if I already know French or Italian? And my short answer is yes. However, there are nuances. So, first of all, there is a question we need to ask. Is one of those languages your native language, or is it also a second language you are learning? I say this because if it's your native language, I do believe it will be a little bit easier than if it is the second language you are learning, and if those are not your foundational languages. But to just say yes, it's a very broad and superficial way of addressing this topic. So, first of all, Spanish, French, Italian, they all come from Latin. And so they share a lot of vocabulary, grammar, and sentence structure. That means that if you already speak one of those languages, you probably will recognize some Portuguese words and can easily make some associations. You pick up basics much faster than someone learning from completely scratch. But here's where I say don't get too confident, because at some point, those similarities actually become one of the biggest challenges. So, when I say this, I mean there is a huge advantage and some sort of leverage that the Spanish, French, or Italian speaker take from the beginning. But this is when we are talking about the basics, meaning when you start, the basics will look easier. But then what you notice is that as you start advancing in the language and you become more an intermediate advanced speaker, that is when it starts getting challenging. So, for example, for a Spanish speaker, he or she already understands the verb conjugations of indicative and subjunctive. Great. This is definitely something that I see people with other languages struggling, but it is an advantage. Things get tricky when we realize that Portuguese doesn't use the sentences and these constructions in the same way as Spanish. So even though you get an understanding how to use subjunctive, when you dive into it, you still will have a lot to learn. And what I notice is the fact that they are so similar is so often what actually creates the obstacle and the challenge for a lot of learners. We take another example of one of those challenges. I like to talk about the vocabulary because we share so much of vocabulary between Portuguese, Spanish, French, and Italian, but it's also the tricky part of it because we share so much vocabulary, so many words, they look pretty much identical. But not all of them are true cognates. And to this, I call them a lot of times false friends. So we encounter so many words that, especially in Spanish and Portuguese, are written the same way, but mean completely different things. Take, for example, the word salsa in Spanish. Salsa in Spanish means molho in Portuguese. And salsa in Portuguese means cilantro in Spanish. So we have two words, salsa in Spanish and salsa in Portuguese, but they mean completely different things in each language, even though they are written the same way, pronounced the same way. I call these false friends. They are false cognates. And so this is where I hear a lot of students sharing with me throughout their journeys. As they begin, they do take a huge leverage in comparison, for example, to English speakers who have never had any touch to Spanish, Italian, or French. But this is just the beginning, and then as they move forward, it actually becomes challenging because so many of the words are so similar that at some point in the learning process, it will become a bit of a mishmash. I did it myself, is when I'm speaking, sometimes it will come up a Portuguese word in the middle. If I'm, for instance, trying to speak Spanish, I will come up sometimes with a Portuguese word in the middle, or same for Italian or for French. And this is very common. This is also where I say to a lot of my students, it's the time to not give up. It is usually brain demanding. There is that breaking point in which becomes so frustrating and so exhausting. And for a lot of those speakers, it's this point when you start automatically switching. Remain persistent, be patient with yourself, because in a couple of time it will get easier, and it will be also easier for you to compartmentalize the two languages and start speaking Portuguese and thinking in Portuguese. And for example, if you're Spanish, speak Spanish and think in Spanish, or French or Italian. Some stories that I have from some students that shared their impressions with me that I selected, and I think they will be also valuable for you guys to hear. So I have one Spanish speaker who had been studying Portuguese for 2 years and living in Portugal for a year and a half. And he said that in the beginning, Spanish made learning Portuguese much easier, especially when reading. But at the more advanced levels, Spanish got in the way. So he found himself accidentally using Spanish words while speaking Portuguese, and still had to work on the pronunciation, even though they could communicate comfortably in most situations. Another native Spanish speaker who had studied 5 foreigner languages described Portuguese as one of the easiest languages to learn if you already know Spanish. He explained that the beginning stages feel very approachable because of the similarities, although grammar and pronunciation can still present challenges at the intermediate and advanced levels. So, this same idea of these Spanish speakers, students that I bring to you, they also apply to French and Italian. So their knowledge of another Romance language gives them a strong head start, but they still need to learn Portuguese on its own terms instead of assuming that everything works the same. And that is the challenge. It is usually much easier than learning a completely unrelated language, but remember that these similarities, they will help you to get started, but mastering the language will require a lot of patience, and it will require paying attention to the difference, especially when you pass the basic level. The intermediate and advanced levels are the milestones for these students, I would say. If you would like to explore in great detail what I mean about these differences, check my new video on the members only section. In the past week, I spoke about the relation between Portuguese and English and how they are so different. And this week, I speak about the relation between Portuguese and Romance language, such as Spanish, Italian, and French, and how, with practical examples, common mistakes, and pronunciation tips, you can get a bit of a deeper understanding on how you can take your learning process. I hope this helps. Don't forget this members only area. It's a way of also supporting my work and saying thank you and allowing me to continue producing high quality content for you guys. It's my pleasure. I hope this was helpful. It made you more excited and looking forward to learn the language. Once again, thank you so much, and I see you soon. Até já!